While the world is focused on the terrorism of ISIS, communist China has launched an aggressive crackdown on Christians. Here to tell us why is a former Tiananmen Square activist and house church pastor, Bob Fu. And later, do extraterrestrials have souls? Vatican Observatory astronomer and author of You Baptize, an Extra-Terrestrial, Brother GUY CONSOLMAGNO, will tell us. And finally, an encore of my interview with Fox News host Bret Baier. He discusses his son's battle with congenital heart disease and how his family found the strength to fight it. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. A big show tonight. Bob Fu, Brother GUY CONSOLMAGNO, and Bret Baier are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. And if you have a question for one of our guests, tweet, call, or email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. A lot of news on the ISIS front as a third Westerner has been executed by the Islamic State. British aid worker David Haines had devoted his life to humanitarian aid to victims in war zones. On Sunday, Prime Minister David Cameron hailed him as a British hero. As in the previous beheadings, the militant in the video presented an additional would-be victim if military campaigns against ISIS continue. In this case, another British national. After a meeting of military and security chiefs, Cameron said the Islamic State poses a massive security threat that cannot be ignored. He did not announce new military measures, but did say British forces would continue offering logistical help to U.S. forces. Counterterrorism efforts will increase, Cameron said, because the Islamic State group is planning attacks against Britain. And a day after the top U.S. military official said American ground troops might be needed in the fight against the Islamic State, President Barack Obama on Wednesday reiterated that he will not commit U.S. troops to a combat mission in Iraq. The president delivered the remarks before troops at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. Even without the use of U.S. troops to root out militants, he remained firm in his pledge to degrade and destroy ISIS.
Whether in Iraq or in Syria, these terrorists will learn the same thing that the leaders of al-Qaeda already know. We mean what we say. Our reach is long. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven. We will find you eventually.
In an interview with the Associated Press earlier in the day, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said that foreign troops are, quote, out of the question, out of consultation, out of discussion. He is further urging the international community to expand its mission against ISIS in Syria. To that end, President Obama has pledged and Congress this week approved U.S. training and arming so-called moderate rebels in Syria. Meanwhile, Iraq's ambassador to the Vatican is warning that the Islamic State wants to assassinate Pope Francis. Italian media reported the same chilling claim from Italian and Israeli sources 2 weeks ago. Ambassador Habib al-Sadr told Italy's La Nazione newspaper, quote, "The threats against the Pope are credible. I believe they could try to kill him during one of his overseas trips or even in Rome." In spite of the various warnings, the Vatican says it's not taking any extra security measures to protect the Pope during his one-day trip to Albania on Sunday. This even amid reports of Islamic militants returning there from the Middle East. Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi said that Pope Francis would use the same open-topped vehicle he uses in St. Peter's Square when he greets crowds in the Muslim-majority Balkan nation. He added that Vatican security officials are calm ahead of the visit. And the jihadi threat has even reached Australia. After early morning raids in Metro Sydney, Brisbane and Logan, On Thursday, police detained 15 people in what is being called a major counterterrorism operation. Pointing to new intelligence, officials said a random violent attack was being planned on Australian soil. The New South Wales Police Commissioner said the ISIS-linked terrorist attack was to be carried out on the streets in a very high-level fashion. A random beheading of citizens was imminent, according to intelligence. Also on Thursday, Prime Minister Tony Abbott and other officials said farewell to 600 Australian troops headed to the Middle East to join the international coalition fighting the Islamic State. Abbott told the troops their mission there is aimed at protecting Australia and its freedom.
There are people who hate who we are and how we live. They hate our freedom, our tolerance, our democracy. And you are there to protect us. You are the long, strong arm of Australia.
And the campaign season is ramping up for the U.S. midterm elections. Vice President Joe Biden joined the infamous Nuns on the Bus for a Democrat voter rally in Des Moines. Sponsored by the social justice D.C. lobbying group Network, the 2014 bus tour is hitting the 10 most competitive Senate races in the U.S., as polls point to a possible Republican takeover in November. Biden hammered away at the Democrats' key midterm mantra, namely shrinking the gap between lower-income Americans and the very wealthy. He calls it a basic question of fairness. Biden lauded the Habit-Free Sisters for their passion and sense of justice, and further thanked them for, quote, working like the devil in helping to get the health care law passed in 2010. And speaking of the health care law, according to a new study by the Government Accountability Office, U.S. taxpayers are funding abortion through the new federal health care plan. The GAO, in a broad survey of insurance programs, found that just 1 out of 18 insurers was segregating funds for abortions. This segregation was a key element of the Affordable Care Act, which allowed its passage. At the time, President Obama promised a small group of pro-life Democrats that federally funded abortion would not be part of Obamacare, winning their support. The GAO study seems to indicate that that promise has been broken. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops blasted the administration over the GAO report. Pro-Life Committee Chairman Cardinal Sean O'Malley said that the only adequate solution would be the complete removal of all abortion coverage from federally subsidized health care plans. And in China, Christian leaders say the faithful are enduring the worst persecution in decades from the communist regime. In amateur video obtained by CNN, riot police are shown clashing with citizens attempting to protect a megachurch marked for demolition by authorities for purported zoning violations. Police are seen brutally beating many faithful and dragging them away. The scene took place in the eastern city of Wenzhou, which is known as the Jerusalem of China for its large Christian population. Over the last several months, the Chinese government has demolished churches and torn down hundreds of crosses atop many churches. Recent statistics show that the Christian population has grown in China, indicating there could soon be more Christians than members of the Communist Party, a possible explanation for the government's crackdown. We'll have more on this with ChinaAid's Bob Fu in our next segment. And in Saudi Arabia, dozens of Christians were rounded up and arrested at a prayer meeting last week by hardline Islamist authorities. The Saudi Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice conducted the sweep after the religious police received a tip about a home-based church. Besides the arrests, Bibles and musical instruments were also confiscated. Saudi Arabia is the only nation in the world with an official ban on all churches. Any faith other than Islam cannot be practiced publicly. This despite there being over 2 million Christian foreign workers in the country. And Cardinal Timothy Dolan is again defending his decision to lead next year's St. Patrick's Day parade in New York as Grand Marshal. The Cardinal has been widely criticized for accepting the role given the parade committee's decision to allow a gay group to march under its own banner for the first time. In a column published Wednesday, Cardinal Dolan reiterated he has no control over the admittance of a, quote, group of self-identified gays of Irish ancestry. He lauded the parade committee for its friendly cooperation with the church and saluted the wisdom of their inclusive decision. The cardinal notes that the most important question for him was whether the new policy of allowing one gay group into the parade violates Catholic faith or morals. If it does, then the integrity of the parade is compromised. And Cardinal Dolan said he would object and refuse to participate or support it. But the cardinal has concluded that the policy change does not violate Catholic faith or morals. Catholic teaching is clear, he said. Being gay is not a sin. Homosexual actions are. To the point, Cardinal Dolan continued, the committee's decision allows a group to publicize its identity, not promote actions contrary to the values of the church, end quote. He said he has been assured that the self-identified gay group is not promoting an agenda contrary to church teaching, but simply identifying themselves as gay people of Irish ancestry. It should be noted that the gay group marching in the parade out at NBC Universal has yet to identify themselves as either Irish or Catholic. And a major shakeup in the Roman Curia, is it coming? We'll see. According to multiple reports, Pope Francis will remove Cardinal Raymond Burke as head of the Vatican's High Court. Appointed prefect of the Apostolic Signatura by Pope Benedict in 2008, Cardinal Burke will reportedly be given the largely honorary post of patron of the Knights of Malta. The position is usually reserved for retiring octogenarian cardinals or is a secondary honor extended to curial cardinals in addition to their jobs at the Vatican. Cardinal Burke, an outspoken defender of orthodoxy and church teaching, at 66 is hardly ready for the pasture. Two veteran Holy See journalists, Sandro Magister and Marco Tostati, have described the move as a demotion and part of the Ratzingerian purge of the Curia. 6 other top officials appointed by Pope Benedict have all been removed from their posts since Pope Francis took office last year. Cardinal Burke had already been ejected from the Congregation of Bishops in 2013, where he was a key advisor to the Pope in the appointment of American bishops. Pope Francis now leans on Cardinals Donald Wuerl of Washington, D.C., and Sean O'Malley of Boston for such advice. Magister and LifeSite News were the first to speculate on Burke's removal, musing that this could be tied to Burke's strong defense of church teaching on the indissolubility of marriage in the lead-up to next month's Synod on the Family. The Vatican has yet to confirm any of these reports. And finally, in a related story, the United States has reached a dubious milestone. For the first time on record, and probably in its history, there are more single Americans than married. According to data used by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are nearly 125 million working-age singles in America. For the first time, that number accounts for more than half of all adults. In 1976, the first year the statistic was tracked, singles accounted for 37% of the population. It has been trending upward ever since. During the same period, the percentage of adult Americans who have never married has risen from 22% to over 30%, while the proportion of those who are divorced, separated, or widowed has reached nearly 20%, up from 15%. The Pew Research Center released its own survey on marriage on Thursday. Their data confirmed America's declining marriage rate. Up next, why has China stepped up its crackdown on Christian churches in recent months? My next guest will tell us. He's the founder and president of the ChinaAid Association. Bob Fu is here, and he'll take your questions. The World Over Live returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. For the past several months, the world's attention has been trained on the Middle East and the savage attacks on Christians and other minorities at the hands of the terrorist army ISIS. But earlier this week, we were reminded that religious persecution is not limited to Iraq and Syria. CNN ran a harrowing report on the crackdown by the Communist Chinese government on its own Christian population. My next guest is a former Tiananmen Square demonstrator and a house church pastor in China. Bob Fu is currently president of the ChinaAid Association. He has a clear-eyed perspective on what's happening to China's Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, and what's fueling this new hostility by Beijing. Bob, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
Pleasure to have you. We're seeing these renewed demonstrations, really savage, pulling down of crosses, demolition of churches. Some are saying this is the worst they've seen in 10 years. Why? What's driving this?
Actually, it's worst since the Cultural Revolution, 20, 30 years. Yeah. The reason, I think, is because the new leadership led by the current President Xi Jinping took a much radical ideology after he took power. And basically, the new thinking is Christianity has grown too fast, and the official document says it's overheated. So the government basically wants to contain the growth and start the cracking down beforehand.
So they're basically stamping out all the signage, all the public symbols of the faith, and in some cases demolishing these churches.
Yes, they're targeting the cross. I mean, with in many of the occasions, I mean, already according to our own documentation, since the beginning of March, over 300, perhaps 400 churches were either destroyed or their crosses were being forcibly removed. With the violence, I mean, many believers were beaten up, and as you just mentioned about the CNN report, and some were even hospitalized because of the violent crackdown.
Yeah, I guess they hit one man over the head. They cracked his skull, an elderly gentleman, and then they stopped their advance, but they only returned a few days later and basically did what they came to do, tear the cross down off the church.
That's right.
But the people are resisting in this Wenzhou, the city of Wenzhou, the Jerusalem of China. They are determined to protect their churches. What might they face if they're arrested?
Oh, if they are arrested, usually they will be interrogated harshly and even face torture. Then some are already being formally charged with what is called disturbing social order, or to obstruct the enforcement of the law. So these kind of arbitrary charges are being filed against those believers who protect the cross.
What I find so peculiar about this current advance by the Beijing regime, why would they target the patriotic associations?
Yes.
These are the official churches.
Approved.
These aren't the underground churches. These are the government-approved, government-financed, and in some cases, government-appointed leaders who are running these churches. Why are they cracking down on their own churches?
Yeah, that's why this is the worst crackdown that has not been seen since the Cultural Revolution.
I imagine they're also hitting the underground church as well.
Oh, I mean, if they are targeting their own approved registered churches, and many house churches already had been targeted, and many pastors were arrested, and some are already being charged and sentenced. And one actually government-sanctioned church pastor in Henan province, on July 4th, the Independence Day of the United States, the pastor is called Zhang Shaojie. He was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. And he was the chairman of the Three Self-Patriotic Movement of that whole county.
It's remarkable.
Still going on.
Tell me about the how the faith breaks down there, because we have the underground church, and then we have the patriotic association churches, Catholic, Protestant.
Yes.
I was told years ago by a cardinal and other bishops in the region, some priests, that even those in the patriotic association, in the official registered churches, that there are actually many who are either collaborating with or indeed secretly aligned with the underground church. Is that true?
I think it's more true to inside the Catholic Church than the Protestant churches. And the Protestant church leaders, especially those political appointees in the leadership of the Three Self-Patriotic Movement and Chinese Christian Council, their political appointees are more loyal to the Communist Party than to the Bible and than to the believers.
Wow.
And of course, many believers are true Christians. And
what is the interaction between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church and these home churches in China?
You know, remember, the persecution really not only strengthened our faith of both the Catholics and the Protestants, but also in a unique way bind them together with love. And in some of the churches, the Catholic bishops, or those who are faithful to the Pope and the Holy Father, were arrested, and then their family members were aided by the persecuted underground churches in the Protestant churches, and vice versa. So there's some collaboration and faith reinforcement, you can call it.
Well, that's a beautiful fruit to come out of a terrible situation.
It is.
But it's nice to see it. I know there are 2 bishops that I know of who died in prison, and there are 2 currently still in prison. There are also a number of Protestant pastors. Tell me about them.
Yeah, there are many Protestant pastors are still in prison. I mean,
or under house arrest.
Yeah, there are thousands of them. I think, like in Xinjiang, there is a Uyghur Christian who used to be a Muslim, and his name is Ali Mujang Yimiti. He was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment for simply preaching the gospel. Oh. Yeah.
Tell me about your incarceration. You were arrested. You and your wife were arrested. You had your own home church. Tell me what happened and how you got out.
Yes, that was like 19 years ago when my wife and I we were in Beijing. I was teaching English in the daytime to the Communist Party leaders, and in the evening, and the rest of my time, I was an underground church pastor. And then my wife and I were both imprisoned and thrown into jail in the suburb of Beijing for 2 months. And then after we were released, we were put under house arrest, and my wife was pregnant without permission. In China, the evil one-child policy, and you could face forced abortion, even for the first child, if you don't get the permission, the yellow card to get pregnant. If you're caught, then you could face the forced abortion. So we had to run out of Beijing and hiding in the countryside. Really, by the grace of the Lord and miracles and after miracles, we were rescued and get out of China and finally accepted as refugees to the United States.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And your story, I'm sure, is repeated time and time again.
We are so thankful. Yeah, it is really a story of how God's faithfulness has been manifested in our lives. Yeah.
Let's talk for a moment about some of the other people who are incarcerated. There are democracy advocates. There are lawyers who have dared to challenge the Beijing regime on behalf of some of these religious minorities, including Catholics and Protestants. What fate awaits them? And why is the world so silent as we see the Chinese tiger roaring again?
Yes, Raymond, there are now thousands of the human rights defenders, human rights lawyers, and we call it in general the prisoner of conscience, are being held in many labor camps. And there is one guy who is perhaps the most prominent Chinese Christian human rights lawyer recognized by the West. His name is Gao Zhisheng. And he was just practicing law, and he was a very accomplished lawyer. And the Chinese Ministry of Justice even at one time recognized him as one of the 10 best lawyers in China. But his life was turned to a sharp turn to misery after he decided to take his legal practice to defend for the vulnerable groups, for the persecuted
And he
Christians.
was held in a very tight cell,
yes,
where he couldn't move. He was in solitary.
In solitary confinement for 3 years, without light, without anybody to talk to him, and only one meal a day with a piece of bread. And he's absolutely in worst shape. After he was released this year, I was with his daughter in the past few days. We organized a ChinaAid campaign, basically selected along with other 30 organizations, these 18 most prominent prisoner of conscience. He's one of them. I mean, the daughter, according to her description, is said her father is in a terrible shape, could not even, speak one complete sentence because of the isolation and
the abuse. They're beating him, and they're torturing him
enormous
as well.
torture.
Yeah. And this goes on and on. I was just reading about this bishop. There was a bishop, Shi Enjiang, I hope I'm pronouncing Enjiang in Hebei. He was arrested in 2001, and his whereabouts are unknown.
Yes, and I mean, Raymond, basically, any bishops now appointed by Rome, who are not like loyal to the Chinese so-called patriotic moment, would be subject for arrest and forced disappearance. And as you just mentioned, many even died and without even knowing where they are being held. I mean, one bishop, I think, I was told by the Cardinal Kong Foundation that he was after being kidnapped and missing for over 15 years, and one day his body was found in front of a park. And I mean, it's still going on, this thing.
It's amazing. What would you like to see the United States and the Western world do? Europe, what are you looking for here?
We're looking for the solidarity. We're looking for really the core defense of our values, and the fundamental, it's really the fundamental interest of the United States and the European countries to defend for the liberty. If the Chinese government would not even obey its own law by arbitrarily, arrest and abuse those most innocent citizens, the beautiful, people of faith, and who has no political agenda and no subversion and no violence, and if they are treated, how could you expect them to obey the international law?
After seeing some of the video we showed people a little earlier, that resistance in the streets, those people standing up with whatever they could get and defying the authorities, do you think this will increase the crackdown on the Christian community?
I think the increase is inevitable. We already have seen the escalation every day. So we came to Washington, D.C. with the 5 daughters of this prisoner of conscience. They made appeal to President Obama the second time to meet, to ask President Obama to meet with them, to hear their story, because he has 2 daughters, but so far we have not get any answer. And the White House said the president is too busy and do not have time to meet with his daughters.
Sad. Sad. Before I let you go, the Pope has sent a letter to the Chinese president saying, I would like to sit down with you to discuss peace. Come to the Vatican or I will come to Beijing happily. What do you make of that overture?
Well, I really appreciate, the Pope's leadership and his generosity and generous offer to the Chinese president. And again, I heard the Chinese Foreign Ministry said he has not received the message yet.
Well, I see nothing, I hear nothing.
I don't anticipate the real policy change because if the Chinese government is really sincere, they should not, they should stop this destruction of Catholic churches and the crosses immediately. And
they would probably consider the Pope an outside power threatening the internal life of China, I imagine, which is how they normally depict.
Internal political consideration.
Bob Fu, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Raymond, for having me.
And we'll have you back. You can keep up with all the news coming from China on human rights and the ongoing persecution of Christians there. You can visit Bob Fu's ChinaAid website at ChinaAid.org. When we return, have you ever wondered whether we're alone in the universe? Are there other life forms out there? And what would that mean not only to the world of science, but to faith? Vatican astronomer and author of Would You Baptize an Alien, Brother GUY CONSOLMAGNO, joins us when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there. Thank you.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. In May, Pope Francis set tongues a-wagging when in a homily during his morning mass, he referenced a visit from extraterrestrials. The media ran with it and suggested that the Catholic Church was confirming the existence of intelligent life on other planets. It wasn't exactly what the Pope was trying to say, but it did create an interesting opportunity to discuss the relationship between faith and science. Are the two in opposition? Joining us tonight is a man who has literally pondered the mysteries of the heavens as part of his job. He is an astronomer at the Vatican Observatory and the president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, a Jesuit, and the co-author of the new book, Would You Baptize an Extra-Terrestrial? We're delighted to have joining us Brother GUY CONSOLMAGNO in studio. Great to see you, brother.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with this notion that people have, that there's a conflict between faith and science. You don't see it that way.
Well, of course not. I mean, here I am. I've got a collar and an MIT ring, which proves you can be at the same time a fanatic and a nerd. and I am. I'm something of a nerd about my religion, but I'm a fanatic about my science. And what people have to remember is that science came from the church.
Yep.
It was invented in the medieval universities. Even the Galileo affair that everyone wants to throw at us because they don't have anything else to throw at us, which tells you something there.
Yeah.
Why was the church interested? Because it was interested in science, because it's interested in the physical universe, because it's interested in creation as an expression of the Creator.
I love that. And we're going to get into the book, which really is a back and forth with you and your co-author, a Jesuit priest, and a colleague at the observatory.
Paul Muller, yeah.
Yeah, and it is really grappling with the big questions that people have.
Yes.
And along the way, though, it's really a philosophical, artistic, educational tour and a scientific exploration as well. You've kind of woven all of that in a beautiful package.
Well, the one thing you hope you also got was a good laugh out of it.
Oh yeah, no, it's lighthearted.
It's very lighthearted. If it's not fun, why don't we?
Why do you want to do that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's back up a little bit before I get into some of these big questions you grapple with. How did you come to this profession, and where did your interest in science begin?
Well, I'm a baby boom kid and a Sputnik kid. You know, I started kindergarten when Sputnik went up. I finished high school at UAD High when people landed on the moon. And when I decided not to become a Jesuit my freshman year at BC, which was another long story in itself, I discovered that MIT, where my best friend was going, had the world's biggest collection of science fiction. So I transferred there only to read science fiction. By accident, got into the Earth and Planetary Science department, discovered there are rocks that fall from the asteroid belt called meteorites. You can touch outer space. What could be more thrilling?
Wow. What did you read?
Trash. Wonderful trash. Space opera, you know.
Yeah, I love it.
And I still to this day enjoy reading wonderful adventure stories that remind you that this universe is something that we live in. It's not just things we ponder about, but planets are places where people have adventures.
I love that. I love that. The book starts, one of the first questions you all wrestle with is the whole question pitting the Big Bang against the book of Genesis.
Right.
They are in absolute conflict. Many say you have to either side with one or side with the other, and science disproves the book of Genesis. You would say what?
Well, first of all, the book of Genesis is not a science book because science books weren't invented when the book of Genesis was written. But not only that, I've got two really thick books in my desk. One is the Bible, one is Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler's treatise on general relativity called Gravitation. Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler's book is 30 years old and it's out of date. Science books go out of date. They're supposed to go out of date. Books of theology, books of philosophy, Shakespeare, Plato, those books don't go out of date. The Bible does not go out of date because it's not a science book. It's a book about God. And you can find 3 different stories of creation in the Bible. All of them have one thing in common. No matter how you think the world was made, God did it deliberately out of love. And that's the message that Genesis gives us. You know, Genesis tells me who's responsible for the universe. My science tells me how he did it.
So it's not an either-or proposition as we often hear.
Not only that.
It's got to be Big Bang, or it's got to be the Lord going and the wind.
Right. But more than that, both of those things misunderstand what religion is and what science is. Science is not a big book of facts. Religion is not a big book of rules. Religion is something that you live. Science is a conversation we have about the facts, and we're never convinced we've got all the facts. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job as a scientist.
We don't want that to happen. Tell me a moment. You are an astronomer, and probably, I guess, the biggest star of all time is the Star of Bethlehem.
Right.
Is there any evidence to prove or disprove, astronomy-wise, that there was a Bethlehem star? What might this have been?
Oh, well, that's the embarrassing thing. There are so many candidates. You can go onto Amazon, type in, Star of Bethlehem, you'll get 400 different books, everyone giving you a different story. Well, this one's right, and obviously all the other guys are wrong. There are some that I think are fairly convincing, and others that maybe not. The bigger question is, why do you care so much? Why is it so important? What is at stake in there being a Star of Bethlehem? And that's what we try to get at in the book, is really, what's motivating you to worry about this? The real question is, does God act in the universe? Does God do things like make stars? Does God do things like have miracles? And what is it to be a miracle? Nowadays, we think of miracles, like the star might have been, as God violating the laws of nature. But that's not what a miracle is, because there were miracles before we had laws of nature.
Yeah. Well, as a scientist, particularly as one who gazes up and watches this new phenomena, seeing things that, frankly, many of our eyes will never see, has it caused doubt to creep into your faith, or has it expanded your faith?
How could it cause doubt? Truth does not contradict truth. St. John Paul II said that. And he's quoting a long line of theological argument going back to Thomas Aquinas and before then. Anything that we learn in the universe that's true brings us closer to God. But here's what I've learned personally as an astronomer, that the universe is logical. It didn't have to be logical. It could have been chaos, but it isn't.
It's designed.
The universe has rules that it follows. Didn't have to be that way. The pagans all thought that, lightning happened because the god of lightning threw things, and if it's just the gods doing stuff, then there's no logic. It would be impossible to do science. But Christianity says no. God does things in an orderly way, in a logical way. He obeys his own laws. Now, here's the amazing thing. Of all of that, I could say the universe is logical, the universe has laws. But what I would never have expected is that it's so beautiful. At the end of the day, it's not only logical, but when you see a sunset, it gives you joy. And when you understand Maxwell's equations that explain the colors, that gives you joy.
No, it deepens. It deepens the wonder and the awesomeness of the Creator.
Of the Creator. It's a way that we have of playing with God. It's how God can interact with us, because he wants us to love him with our hearts, but also our minds, and also our souls.
I need to share something with you. I teased it at the beginning of the segment. Pope Francis, during one of his morning homilies, had this to say. I'll share it with the audience. He said, imagine if, for example, tomorrow, an expedition of Martians came, green with long noses and big ears, just like children draw them, and were to say, I want to be baptized, what would happen? Now, the media went crazy when he said this. What was he trying to say? And then I'll pop the big question to you.
Well, of course, he was really talking about that scene in the early church where they're trying to decide whether or not to let Gentiles in. And for them to accept Gentiles into their religion was as strange and as frightening to them as having Martians would be for us today. That was the point he was trying to make, and a wonderfully creative point.
Now, here's the big question. Would you baptize an extraterrestrial?
Only if she asks.
Okay. Well, so you're going to call me when this happens? Because I'd like to be there at the font when you do it.
It's fascinating. We get emails all the time. I got one just this past week. The Pope has to say that it's like he has to, people are convinced not only that there's extraterrestrials, but by golly, they're just like what they read about in the papers, or they're just like what they had a dream about last night.
E.T.
We don't know of any extraterrestrials. We don't even know of microbial life yet elsewhere. Do I think it's out there? Probably, but I don't have the data.
Stephen Hawking, the physicist, who is a member of the Pontifical Academy of Science, said because of the laws of physics, it has removed the need for God. First of all, what did he mean by that, and does he have a point?
He has a point in that if you think God is, by definition, what started the universe, and then you say, well, actually, what started the Big Bang was a fluctuation in the gravity field, all you're doing is you're proving that, well, God must be gravity, which might explain why Catholics, celebrate Mass, but that's not what we think God is. That's not the Christian idea of creating out of nothing. Do you remember as a kid the game Mousetrap?
Sure.
There's this really complicated thing, and you crank
like
it up.
Little roller coaster, and you drop
and then you start one thing off, and it goes blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And they think that God is the person who starts things off, but no, God's the guy who invented the game back at the Ideal Toy Company 5 years earlier. If you reduce God to just another force along with gravity or electricity, you're turning God into a nature God. You're turning God into the God of lightning again. You're reducing God to nothing more than Zeus. But God is not a nature God. God is supernatural. When God supports the universe at every instant, because God is outside of time, God allows there to be laws of nature. God allows there to be gravity. God allows there to be a universe. And then, as He creates us, He gives us the freedom to love Him in return.
Talk for a moment, I'm getting a few emails about this, about the creative design movement, which was kind of formulated in reaction to evolution. How is the Catholic to look at both of these? And as a scientist and a man of faith, you would say what?
Well, God is not something you come to at the end of a long line of logical proofs. Nobody has ever been convinced by a syllogism. Nobody's ever been converted by a syllogism. God is what we start with. If I believe in God and I believe in the Creator, then I can see evidence of His work throughout the universe. If I believe that the universe is nothing but mechanism, I'll see evidence of nothing but mechanism, because I'm just returning back to the very thing I assumed in the first place. The thing that worries me when people try to use science to prove God is that they're making science bigger than God as a result. I'm a scientist. I love science, but I don't want it to be someplace where it doesn't belong.
Has it deepened your faith? The exposure to science?
Science deepens my faith, but it's really the other way around. Faith is what makes it possible for me to do science. Faith is what makes me want to do science. You'll find a terrible thing happens when scientists are out there and they've lost the faith in truth, that they've lost the faith. Stephen Hawking thinks that God was the force that started things. But Stephen Hawking is dedicated to truth. But God is truth. If you're worshiping truth, you're worshiping God. They sometimes, when an atheist tells me they don't believe in God, I ask them, well, what's the God there are a lot of versions of God. I don't believe it. I only believe in one God.
Yeah, and many times they believe in multiples. So, Brother Guy, thank you so much for being here. It's a fascinating book. Would you baptize an extraterrestrial? Questions from the astronomer's inbox at the Vatican Observatory. Before I let you go, very quickly, tell us about the Vatican Observatory. It's there at Castel Gandolfo. You've got one in the backyard, in the Vatican Gardens, and here in Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, the Church literally supports astronomy. The telescopes are on the roof of the Pope's summer home. We have 12 astronomers from 5 continents. We speak 8 languages, and that's just one of our guys. We cover every kind of astronomy. We work with the regular astronomers. We collaborate with astronomers around the world. We've even been elected to astronomers' positions in the International Astronomical Union.
It's amazing.
We were involved in demoting Pluto, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, I'm sorry for poor Pluto, but there's always Donald Duck and Mickey.
That's it.
You can visit the Vatican Observatory online at vofoundation.org. It's a fascinating gift, really, to the whole church. Coming up next, the host of Fox News Special Report and the author of Special Heart is here to talk about the toughest story he ever encountered and how it changed him. Our interview with Bret Baier, When the World Over Live, continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. He is the chief political anchor at Fox News and the host of Special Report, which for the past 5 years has dominated the time slot in all of cable news. During that time, Bret Baier and his wife Amy have faced an even greater challenge at home. It began on the day their son Paul was born 7 years ago, followed by some shocking news. Their terrifying and inspiring journey is chronicled in the book Special Heart, a journey of faith, hope, courage, and love. Here's an encore of my recent interview with Bret Baier. Tell me what happens. It's the high point of your married life. You have this beautiful baby boy, Paul, and a nurse recognizes a coloring, a bluish coloring that she's not totally comfortable with.
Right. In fact, it's even more amazing than that. So we had this idyllic 24 hours with our new child, our firstborn, first son. So we had that blissful time in a hospital room that a lot of people can remember. And then the first nurse actually has a seizure, unfortunately. She was fine, but she's moved off a rotation. We get this second nurse, Beth Kennedy. We call her our angel. She notices that Paul is turning pale, and she wants to put him in for some tests. They thought it was a bacterial infection. Turns out they call in a cardiologist, and he has 5 serious congenital heart defects. The cardiologist happened to be going by the hospital at the time. He was really one of the top in the world.
Wow.
And he comes in and tells us that he has to have surgery, really complex surgery in the first days, or he's going to die. So that moment was, as you can imagine, earth-shattering.
Traumatic. And I mean, your wife is, I can only imagine what a mother is going through at this moment. And you're working, I mean, you're a White House correspondent in the midst of all this. How do you hold it together? What do you do? Do you just sort of say, all of my focus is going to be on this child and his survival?
Yes, but before we got there, there were some dark days. I mean, I'll be honest with you. We went down. We had to wait 12 days for a surgeon to come back from overseas. And Amy, she collapsed in Children's National. She became the oldest patient in Children's National. And we went to the emergency room. I went with her as we're rolling down in this gurney, and she's passed out. And we came to the point, she came to, she was fine. We said, listen, we're going to focus on prayer. We're going to focus on family, and we're going to focus on being positive and being the parents that Paul needs us to be. So we came up with this mantra at the end of every day. We'd give each other a teary high five and say, we're one day closer to getting Paul home. And we just kind of turned it around at that moment.
I mean, it is, and you narrate in the book the stages of, first of all, it's great because it's a love story at the beginning. It's really about you and Amy and how you meet. And then you're quickly drafted into, you know, the guerrilla exercise in parenting, something all of us sort of tremble even considering. Your son goes through this first open heart surgery, and then they say he needs a stomach surgery. And you were really ticked off.
I was. I was on the phone. I was at work. I get a call, and Amy said, listen, don't freak out. But we're at the hospital. He needs a stomach surgery. It's not related to his heart. And I said, wait a second. The solution to everything is not surgery. Can we get another opinion?
Exactly.
But we made it through. So Paul had 3 open heart surgeries, 7 angioplasties, and that stomach surgery. He turned 7 at the end of June. And Raymond, he's doing fantastic.
7 years old.
He's growing like a weed. He has a lot of energy. I joked with his surgeon a couple weeks ago. I said, you know, last time you could have turned it down just a hair, you know.
How did your faith get you through this? I know you said those dark days, and we can all imagine being in that moment. Obviously, you're Catholic. You decided to baptize him in the ICU early on. Tell me about that.
We wanted to put him on God's scoreboard early. And to be honest with you, we didn't know if Paul was going to make it. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth. And it was just important for us to have that ceremony and to be in that place. And there was nothing fancy about it, but it was the most beautiful baptism I'd ever ever been to.
What did it teach you about the power of prayer? So many people, I was on this email chain, I don't even know how I got looped in. Suddenly I was getting these updates every day from you. Thousands of people had to be looped in.
It was amazing. I sent it to, friends, they sent it to friends, and it kept on going. And before you knew it, I was getting hundreds of prayers coming in from around the world. Somebody in the Vatican, a priest there, emailed me, and I was reading these to Amy, and we were honestly, Raymond, lifted up by that. And for anybody who doubts the power of prayer, well, I think you should read this book, because it changed us, it turned us and helped us get through everything. Everybody doesn't, believe now what we believe, but I tell people, however you're going to get there, get to the place where you imagine that the tough time is over. For us, prayer was the vehicle that got us there.
And that idea of trusting, it might have come from Brit Hume or Tony Snow.
Tony Snow.
Trust the doctors, trust God, and just you really don't have any other choice at that point.
I mean, you have to give it up. It is not you. My job, I tried to out-hustle everybody, outwork everybody. I could not out-hustle this deal. I wanted to be the one on that gurney instead of my son. But, you mentioned Tony Snow. He, in the middle of cancer treatment, was emailing me all the time with prayers and support throughout that. Yeah, no, he was amazing. He's a great guy. You talk in the book about the most recent heart surgery, his third, was probably the hardest because he could ask you questions and you had to sort of walk him through it. What was that like? And he's not at the end yet, right? I mean, Paul needs others as he grows, as the heart grows. Yeah, and he's growing fast. So he may have one other open heart surgery. We hope that's it. And probably some angioplasties along the way. But that last one was the toughest because you had to get him to own it. It was scary. He was asking mortality questions about could he die? And you have to be honest. But you also have to say, listen, God has a plan for you. This is going to work out. Before you knew it, he did own it. And we brought his cardiologist into his kindergarten classroom. And he started essentially holding a press conference with the kids.
And you were the press secretary?
Yes, go ahead. What was the toughest part? He said, the medicine's yucky. Okay, next. And then he lifted up his shirt and he showed his scar. He owns it now.
There was a question he asked you, and I'd love for you to relate your answer to him. He said, why do I have to go through all this hard stuff when the kids in my class don't? You said what to him? I love this answer.
Yeah, it was about 2 in the morning, last angioplasty. And he said that to me, and I scrambled. And I said, buddy, God has a plan for you. He's just testing you. And you are passing the test with flying colors. You're going to have an amazing life. And he said, okay, Daddy, I love you. And went back to bed.
I love it.
I think it's amazing to see the resilience in kids. But they need some guidance. They need to know that you're in their corner.
Well, I also love the way you frame this story. It's also within the love of a family. And even though that family is stressed, and I'm sure this put an enormous stress on your marriage, I can only imagine.
It actually brought us together. Some marriages it drives apart. We found that when one of us was down, the other was up, and we got closer because of it.
Well, and that love he can feel, and you sense that in the book. It's sort of in between the verses here, that as stressful as this was for him, Mom and Dad were there and they were with him every step of the way. And that's a beautiful kind of subplot to the story, I thought, as I read through it.
Thank you.
How did this change the way you see all of this? We're in the middle of this bubble, this fishbowl of D.C., and imagine, we're just inches away from the levers of power and it's all right here. How did it shape your daily life on the job?
It gave me perspective. It gave me this perspective that if there's bickering on one side or the other up on Capitol Hill, there are families dealing with bigger things out there, and we need to remember that every day. It also gave me an appreciation for God and the church and how that factors into everything. It gave me an appreciation of the amazing medicine that's going around, despite whatever you hear about the bureaucracy of healthcare. The amazing stuff that's going on around our country, medicine-wise.
Did it sensitize you as a reporter to the depth and importance of your coverage of the Affordable Care Act?
Definitely. Definitely, which made it really important that, you know, covering all sides of that. Listen, I sat next to a family in that waiting room that didn't have any insurance. I sat next to another family that didn't speak English. They got the same treatment from the same surgeon that my son did. Because Children's National is based on charity and they fund things. Not every hospital is like that. So it did give me an appreciation of that issue broadly. I
also love that all the proceeds of this book, all of them, are 100%. Going to pediatric research everywhere or just at Children's? There's
a number of organizations around the country, and frankly, if there's some out there, we're gathering more all the time. But every dollar of my proceeds will go to various nonprofits. And there's amazing things happening, Raymond. There's 1 out of 100 kids in our country is born with a congenital heart defect. 1 out of 100.
No, I didn't realize that until I read the book.
And half of those have to have a surgery or procedure in the first 6 months.
Are you concerned that those specialists, the surgeon that worked on your son, that you saw at Children's, that those specialists are disappearing? They're leaving the field, or they're going, you know, offshore because of the situation that's been created with the health regime as it now is unveiling itself?
Yeah, that's a big concern, and we report on that side of it too. Privately in my life, I do everything to fund this hospital to make sure that they don't lose a single doctor.
Right.
But other hospitals around the country, you know, it's charity in our country. People forget how much we actually give to hospitals and those organizations.
Final question: why did you write this book? Why did you feel now was the time to write this book?
I looked back at these emails, and we gathered them together. And I read them, and I said, there is a backbone here for a book, I think, that hopefully can inspire people. You know, everybody has something, some challenge, something. Not necessarily a kid in the hospital, but something. And this is how we got through our something. And hopefully it helps people. I mean, on this book tour, there were people coming up crying, telling us their stories. And it was really touching for Amy and I to be able to do that.
Well, it's a source of hope, and I also love that again, it's your relationship with your wife that sort of frames the book, and that bond you feel sustaining your son through these difficult passages, but he seems to have come out on the other side, a fantastic, great little boy. So we certainly wish you the best, and thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Raymond.
Special Heart, A Journey of Faith, Hope, Courage, and Love by Bret Baier is still available in bookstores everywhere and online. Before we go, for those of you in southern Louisiana and northern Louisiana and the surrounding areas, I'll be speaking at a special breakfast for the Will Woods Foundation back home in New Orleans on September 30th. If you'd like to attend, visit willwoods, WILLWOODS.org. You can find more information also on my website, RaymondArroyo.com, and we'll see you on the 30th of September. Well, that's all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. You don't want me to be lonely. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And tune in next week when I'll be talking with David Limbaugh about his new book, Jesus on Trial, plus author and columnist Jennifer Fulwiler on finding real happiness. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.